Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's wedding was already one of the biggest events of the year, but now new details are starting to emerge, and some of them are changing the way fans see the celebration. Let me break it down. For months, this wedding was a guessing game. Rhode Island, a rose garden, a private estate, name a rumor, and someone had floated it. Then the black SUVs started rolling up to Madison Square Garden, and the guessing stopped. Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce were married as they celebrated their wedding with hundreds of guests Friday at Madison Square Garden in New York City. And a representative for Swift confirmed in a statement provided to CBS News that the two were married in a ceremony officiated by comedian Adam Sandler. Described as a friend of the couple, that detail alone answered a question that had been floating around for weeks: who would actually marry them? Turns out it wasn't a judge or a family pastor. It was Sandler, a guy who'd already crossed paths with Kelce professionally. Sandler had given Kelce a cameo in Happy Gilmore 2 the year before, and he served as their officiant. And apparently he didn't just read vows off a card. TMZ reported that Adam Sandler sang Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift an original song as he officiated their wedding. So the guy known for comedy specials turned into part-time wedding singer for one of the biggest nights in pop culture. Now, the setup itself. Large black SUVs were seen starting to arrive at the famous venue shortly after 3 p.m. ET, pulling into white tents set up outside. The plans included a cocktail hour, ceremony, and then a reception, with the celebration expected to stretch into the early hours Saturday. According to sources, that's not a quick courthouse signing. That's a full production, running close to half a day and night combined. Outside, it wasn't quiet either. A large crowd of onlookers and fans lined the streets near the arena, holding signs of support and hoping to catch a glimpse of those attending the wedding. Fans didn't just show up to gawk at limousines, they came with signs. They staked out spots. They treated the sidewalk outside MSG like their own front row seat to something they'd been following for years. And what greeted arriving guests inside wasn't your typical arena setup either. In a now-deleted X post, AMC CEO Adam Aron, one of the guests, shared that the couple transformed the venue into a secret garden, complete with large photos of Swift and Kelce at every age. Picture that for a second. The same building that hosts Knicks games and Rangers games turned into a garden with a visual timeline of two people's entire lives plastered on the walls. Other guests backed that up. A photo shared to personal trainer Rob Jordan and his wife Joanne's Instagram accounts offered a first glimpse inside the wedding that Stephanopoulos described as a garden inside the garden, with the couple holding hands as they walked up an orangey carpeted staircase toward the entrance. A garden inside the garden, that's the phrase going around, and it fits. MSG doesn't usually get called charming, but that night, apparently it did. Now let's talk about who actually stood up there with them, because there's a twist most people didn't expect. The couple had no bridesmaids or groomsmen. Swift's brother, Austin Swift, served as her man of honor, while Kelce's brother, retired NFL offensive lineman Jason Kelce, served as Kelce's best man. No wedding party lined up in matching dresses and tuxedos, just two brothers, standing in for the roles usually filled by a dozen people. And the outfits. This is where it gets specific. According to Swift's representative, her wedding dress was created by Christian Dior Haute Couture. A statement described the bride and groom's wedding ceremony. Looks as created by Christian Dior Haute Couture, designed by Jonathan Anderson, the creative director of Dior's women's, men's, and haute couture collections, in close collaboration with the bride and groom, marking the designer's first couture wedding dress for a world-renowned celebrity, with shoes custom-made by Christian Louboutin and the bride wearing Cartier jewelry. So this wasn't a dress pulled off a rack somewhere. It was built specifically for her by a designer who'd never done this exact thing before for anyone at this level of fame. The vows themselves are where the details get personal. Multiple wedding guests have let slip enough details about Swift and Kelce's wedding vows to pique curiosity. The couple wrote their own vows in little books, and they were long. George Stephanopoulos, who was there, described the ceremony afterward, saying the ceremony was great, moving, that Adam Sandler was funny and touching, and that the vows were everything you would hope for: real, vulnerable, serious, and silly, deeply loving. His co-anchor Robin Roberts echoed the same sentiment about those little books full of handwritten words. One detail that's been making the rounds since the wedding wrapped: it wasn't the bride who cried the most. According to one attendee who spoke to NBC News, you'd think the bride would be the one crying more, but it was actually Travis that was more emotional. A 6'5" tight end who makes his living getting hit by linebackers, undone by his own vows. That detail spread fast because it wasn't the image anyone expected going in. So that's the shape of the night: the officiant, the setting, the vows, the tears. But to understand why this wedding looked the way it did and why it took this long to happen, you've got to go back to how these two even got here. None of this happened overnight. This wedding was the finish line of a relationship that had been under a microscope since it started, and Swift and Kelce spent nearly 2 years managing that attention before they ever set foot in MSG. Start with the engagement itself, because that's really where the countdown to this wedding began. Swift announced their engagement on Instagram with photos of a flower-filled backyard proposal and a massive diamond ring. The duo announced their engagement in a joint Instagram post captioned, "Your English teacher and your gym teacher are getting married." That caption alone tells you the tone they wanted: playful, self-aware, not some overly serious announcement. Two public figures poking fun at how mismatched their jobs sound on paper. When Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce announced their engagement with a simple Instagram post in August 2025, it broke the internet. And from that point forward, everything either of them did got read as a clue. In the time since, the superstar couple continued to turn heads. Swift released her 15th Billboard 200 #1 album, The Life of a Showgirl, that October, moving a record-breaking 4 million equivalent album units in its first week. While Kelce signed on for his 14th season with the Kansas City Chiefs the following April. So even while planning a wedding, both of them kept their day jobs running at full speed. One dropping a record-breaking album, the other committing to another season of professional football. Swift had actually talked about the earliest days of the relationship in a documentary clip that surfaced around this time, saying she never expected the story to start the way it did. She described it saying, "If you ever would have told me that the most meaningful relationship I would ever have would start with a man saying that he was butthurt, that I didn't want to meet him, like unbelievable." That's the origin story fans had heard pieces of for years. Kelce's failed attempt at handing her a friendship bracelet with his number on it after one of her shows, finally confirmed in her own words. Now, the secrecy. This is where the story gets almost tactical. Both of their families were pulled into constant questioning, and both refused to give anything up. Kelce's mother, Donna, got cornered by a photographer at the airport and shut it down instantly. Kelce's mother, Donna Kelce, straight up refused to speak about her potential involvement with the wedding planning when approached by a photographer at LAX, saying only, "I'm just happy. I'm so happy for them." Not a single detail, just warmth and a wall. Kylie Kelce, married to Jason, dealt with the same pressure from a different angle. Her own podcast audience, Swift's sister-in-law, Kylie Kelce, even made a plea on her Not Gonna Lie podcast in April for people to stop asking her for wedding dirt. Think about that. She has a podcast specifically because people want to hear her talk, and she had to use it to beg people to stop asking about the one thing they most wanted to know. The secrecy went further than just family members staying quiet. The couple built in actual operational security. One way Swift and Kelce had been able to keep details about their big day under wraps before it was confirmed that the location would be MSG was by waiting until just before the wedding date to tell guests where exactly it would be, aside from somewhere in New York City. Guests didn't even get the address until the last possible moment. That confusion wasn't limited to random invitees either. Even people who play professional football and know Kelce personally were left guessing. George and Claire Kittle, who confirmed they'd be attending, got asked directly by Entertainment Tonight whether MSG was actually the site. Claire's answer was blunt, "We don't know," while George added, "I actually asked Travis last night, and he laughed at me. I'm half expecting there just to be a jumbo jet on a runway." and they put us on a plane somewhere. A guy who plays tight end alongside Kelce in the league's unofficial tight end university crew still had no idea where he was headed the night before. And it wasn't just word of mouth they controlled. They engineered the paper trail too. It also appears that guests received custom watermarked invitations that would allow the pop star and Kelce to trace each one back to its original recipient so as to avoid leaked information. That's the kind of detail usually reserved for classified documents, not wedding stationery. If a photo of the invite leaked, they'd know exactly whose invite it came from. Even location scouting became part of the mystery. Fans had spent weeks fixated on a completely different place. Part of that was through the process of elimination. Swifties descended on Watch Hill, Rhode Island, where Swift owns a seaside estate, in June. But tabloid reports of a ceremony there proved unfounded. An entire fan army camped out at the wrong coastline while the real plan was forming 200 miles away in Manhattan. By the time law enforcement sources started confirming details to news outlets, the picture sharpened fast. Following weeks of reports that the wedding would take place at some point over 4th of July weekend in New York City, a law enforcement official confirmed to the Associated Press that the couple's nuptials were scheduled for the night of Friday at Madison Square Garden, and that a rehearsal dinner was planned for the night prior. That's when the speculation turned into fact, not from Swift or Kelce themselves, but from officials handling the security logistics behind the scenes. And there was a reason the choice of MSG made sense once people thought about it. A reporter who had been covering the wedding explained the logic to NPR, noting the appeal wasn't about spectacle so much as containment. She put it simply, it's sort of this locked box where paparazzi can't get inside. There's not going to be helicopters overhead. She can release photos of the event and her dress, which we're all very curious to see on her own terms. In other words, the same qualities that make MSG a fortress for concerts and championship games made it the one place in New York where two of the most photographed people alive could actually control their own image for a night. So the road here was 2 years of dodged questions, watermarked paper, decoy rumors, and a security plan that rivaled anything either of them had dealt with professionally. All of that buildup is exactly why, when the actual night arrived, it needed to deliver, and by every account it did. If the secrecy leading up to the wedding was tight, the guest list that eventually walked through those doors was the opposite. Wide open, sprawling, and honestly a little overwhelming to track. The couple welcomed around 1,000 guests at Madison Square Garden to celebrate their marriage. According to law enforcement sources familiar with the security planning, 1,000 people. That's not a wedding reception. That's closer to a small concert crowd, except every single person in that crowd was someone recognizable. The guest list was impressive, expansive, and occasionally befuddling. That's putting it mildly. Start with the film world. There was the Hollywood contingent, including Steven Spielberg, Gigi Hadid and Bradley Cooper, Dakota Johnson, Eric Stonestreet, and Hugh Grant. A director who's shaped modern cinema for 5 decades, standing in the same room as a former SNL cast member and one of the biggest supermodels alive. The comedy and late-night crowd showed up in force, too. Kansas City native and Chiefs fan Jason Sudeikis was also there, as well as self-professed Swiftie Nikki Glaser. And Jennifer Lopez, Graham Norton, Jimmy Fallon, and Zoe Kravitz were also spotted among the arrivals. That's a stand-up comedian, a talk show host, and one of music's biggest pop stars all under the same roof. None of them the actual reason people were there. Then there's the friendship circle layer. The people who've known Swift for years, not just professionally but personally. Swift's close friend Selena Gomez posted a photo on her Instagram account wearing a fitted, beaded golden gown, the same color Swift wore for Gomez's wedding the previous September. That's not a coincidence. That's the kind of detail two close friends plan between themselves, a quiet callback that only people paying attention would even catch. The sports side of the guest list ran just as deep, which makes sense given who the groom is. Then you had the sports figures, like New England Patriots head coach Mike Vrabel and sportscaster Aaron Andrews. Add to that actors Hugh Grant, Jason Sudeikis and Ethan Hawke, soccer star Abby Wambach, sports broadcaster Joe Buck, musician Benson Boone, NFL star Cooper Kupp, and Paulina Gretzky, daughter of hockey legend Wayne Gretzky. Kelce's football world and Swift's music world weren't just overlapping for one night. They were fully merged, table by table. Musicians turned up too, and not just as guests. Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's wedding at Madison Square Garden drew a star-studded guest list, from Selena Gomez and Bradley Cooper to Dakota Johnson and Ed Sheeran. Sheeran had been rumored to attend for weeks leading up to the night, and Swift had indicated that Ed Sheeran was a lock to be in attendance long before the actual event confirmed it. Even Kelce's own coach made the cut. Kelce's coach, Andy Reid, and fellow tight end university scholar George Kittle had seemingly confirmed their invitations in the days before the wedding. Picture an NFL head coach trading his usual sideline cap for a seat at his star player's wedding instead. Some of the reactions from attendees afterward captured just how big this felt, even for people who attend celebrity events for a living. Sportscaster Rich Eisen, who came with his wife, put it plainly in a post afterward, writing that Storybook doesn't do the expression of love we witnessed justice. That's a broadcaster who covers major sports events for a career, reaching for a bigger word than storybook to describe what he saw. Actress Niecy Nash, who attended with her wife, needed even fewer words. She summed the whole night up writing simply, "Wow, ooh is the best way to describe it." From beginning to end, no detail was spared. Congrats! Multiple exclamation points. A string of W's. The kind of reaction you don't fake for a press release. And it wasn't only entertainment and sports names walking those halls. Steven Spielberg departs Madison Square Garden following the wedding of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, and Jessica Alba and Danny Ramirez depart Madison Square Garden as well. Add in Tom Hanks and Paul McCartney departing the venue, and you start to understand why photographers camped outside for hours, just hoping to catch faces leaving the building. For the fans stuck behind barricades outside, none of them got inside. But that didn't stop the night from feeling like theirs too. Swift's music has served as the soundtrack to a generation of adolescent heartbreaks and coming-of-age crises, and for her fans, this was a cause for celebration. Crowds gathered behind barricades as close as they could get to MSG ahead of the expected celebration, holding signs outside the venue. One image summed up the outside energy better than anything else that night. The Empire State Building was visible in the distance as people took photos of a giant screen showing the message, "Just and T married, T&T for Taylor and Travis," outside Madison Square Garden. New York basically turned its own skyline into a wedding announcement. So that's the crowd. Hollywood football, music, comedy, and thousands of fans locked outside the gates, but locked into the moment anyway. What happened once everyone actually sat down for the reception is where things get even more specific. Once the ceremony wrapped, the reception is where guests started collecting the details that would eventually leak out piece by piece. And a lot of it centers on two people who spoke directly to reporters after the fact. According to two attendees who spoke with NBC News, the night kept escalating well past the ceremony itself. The magic didn't stop there. The reception was one to remember, with performances from Paul McCartney and Stevie Nicks, the two guests said. That's not a wedding band covering popular songs. That's two legends of two entirely different eras of music, performing live for a private crowd of 1,000 people. The Stevie Nicks connection wasn't random either. There had been signs pointing to it for weeks. Tim McGraw and Stevie Nicks were speculated to perform at the wedding according to Page 6, and Swift had performed with Nicks at the 52nd Grammy Awards previously. While at a Game 4 NBA Finals appearance, Swift had even worn a shirt that read Stevie Nicks, a pun that fans caught immediately and treated as basically a confirmed hint. But here's the twist nobody fully expected. Swift herself didn't perform at the actual wedding. While Swift did not perform at the wedding, she did so at the rehearsal dinner the night before. With Kelce, as the couple sang their favorite rock song together, the two attendees added, So the woman who spent 2 decades performing for stadiums chose to save her own voice for the smaller, more private night before, and let McCartney and Nicks carry the actual wedding night instead. That rehearsal dinner, by the way, had its own scale. On the Thursday evening before, Swift and Kelce held a smaller gathering at the arena for around 100 people. Sources familiar with the plans told ABC News. 100 people is smaller only in comparison to the 1,000 who showed up the next night. Most weddings would consider that the entire guest list. Security for both nights, by the way, wasn't loose in the slightest. For both events, a strict no-phone policy was in place for everyone inside the venue, including guests, vendors, and security personnel, according to sources. That explains why almost nothing leaked in real time. Nobody in that building was even holding a phone, let alone posting from it. Back to the reception itself. Food was apparently a major topic among guests afterward. The two guests also shared other details, raving about the food that was served that night, which was from the couple's favorite New York City restaurants. Not a generic catering company, actual spots the two of them frequent, brought in and set up inside the garden for the night. Then there were the games, which might be the most unexpected detail to come out of the whole event. One standout aspect of the wedding was the games that attendees were invited to play, the two guests said, and through the games, people could win tickets to be submitted into a raffle, a wedding reception with built-in competitions, feeding into prizes, like some hybrid between a gala and a carnival. And the prizes weren't small either. The raffle items, which included multiple designer bags, also featured a 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle, the storied car that the couple rode together on their first date. That single detail says a lot about how personal this wedding actually was underneath all the celebrity noise. Somewhere in that room, a guest walked away as the new owner of the exact car model that carried these two on their very first date. Guests also got a small preview of what the interior actually looked like before most of the public did, thanks to a couple who posted a photo from inside. A photo shared to personal trainer Rob Jordan and his wife Joanne's Instagram accounts offered the first glimpse inside the wedding, described as a garden inside the garden, with the couple holding hands as they walked up an orangey carpeted staircase toward what appeared to be the entrance to the wedding. Behind the scenes, preparation for that transformation had been underway for at least a full day before the actual event. Workers were seen hanging draperies inside Madison Square Garden ahead of the wedding, with members of the armed forces standing outside. The venue decked out for a one-of-a-kind celebration, celebrity event planners told CBS News, with one comparing the process to producing a blockbuster movie. One planner watching the setup from outside picked up on the same garden theme guests would later confirm, noting West predicted there would be a bucolic garden theme after watching a bar stretcher labeled "Trees Get Unloaded," saying, "So I'm picturing kind of like a forest or a garden." Even amid all the celebrity buzz, there was room for smaller, lighter human moments. Winnipeg quarterback Zach Collaros couldn't attend because of his own game schedule, but he'd apparently been part of Kelce's life for the long haul. Kelce had attended all of Collaros's wedding-related events back in 2019, including engagement parties, bachelor parties, and the wedding itself. Collaros joked with the couple recently, telling them, "You guys could have looked at the damn schedule," before locking in a date that clashed with his own football commitments. So between the legendary performers, the untouched phones, the restaurant-quality food, and a vintage car handed out as a party favor, the reception delivered exactly the scale that a 1,000-person guest list demanded. But the story doesn't end when the last song plays. There's still the question of what happens after, and that's where the picture is still filling in. Once the reception wound down into the early hours of Saturday, the wedding itself became old news almost as fast as it happened, replaced by a new wave of details still trickling out. One of the more meaningful pieces to emerge wasn't about the party at all. It was about money moving quietly before the cameras even arrived. Just hours before their Thursday event, a representative for Swift confirmed to ABC News that she and Kelce had donated $26 million to charities, both in New York City and across the United States. That's a number that got far less attention than the dress or the guest list, but it's arguably one of the bigger real-world consequences of the entire event. Security around the whole thing stayed tight enough that some basic facts are still fuzzy days later. It was not immediately clear if the wedding ceremony occurred at Madison Square Garden or at some point before. Even with 1,000 witnesses in the building, the exact sequencing of the actual "I do" moment remains something reporters are still piecing together from second-hand accounts, and that mystery seems intentional. One planner who spoke with CBS News about why MSG made sense pointed to Swift's long personal relationship with the building itself, saying Swift's familiarity with Madison Square Garden made it an appealing option for the couple, noting, "I think for most people, this seems like the weirdest choice in the world. But for her, this is spot on. It has total security." Total security, it turns out, doesn't just mean physical safety. It means control over the story, too. That control extended to filming. Guests noticed signage the moment they walked in. There were signs posted up at some of the entrances of MSG, notifying people inside that they would be filmed, though whether the result of that recording will ever be made public is another matter. So somewhere there's footage of the entire night, and right now nobody outside Swift and Kelce's team knows if the public will ever see a frame of it. That kind of restraint tracks with how the couple has handled almost everything since the engagement. Even in the run-up to the wedding, Swift kept deflecting questions with humor rather than answers. On an appearance months before the big day, she dodged specifics about planning, but joked instead about her ideal guest list, saying she'd be inviting anyone I've ever talked to. That's the tone she'd kept up the entire 2 years. Funny, deflecting, giving fans just enough to chew on without confirming anything real. As for what happens now that the wedding is actually behind them, even that's being left open. Swift and Kelce haven't shared a honeymoon destination or other post-wedding plans. But Brittany Spanos, a journalist and professor at New York University who teaches a course about the pop star, said she thinks there's probably new music on the way. Given Swift's track record of turning major life events into albums, that's not exactly a wild prediction. It's practically expected at this point. There's also the CNN observation that's aged well since the wedding wrapped. The idea that whatever's still unknown about that night is staying that way on purpose. The rest of the picture has not come fully into focus, and further details will likely come from Swift and Kelce themselves, whenever or if they feel like sharing, given how tightly they controlled every other piece of this. The watermarked invites, the no-phone policy, the last-minute venue reveal. There's no reason to think that pattern changes now. What's left, really, is the shape of a night that 1,000 people witnessed, and the rest of the world only got in fragments. A dress built specifically for her, a groom who cried more than the bride, a car from a first date handed out as a prize, and a couple of music legends performing for guests who'd been told not to even touch their phones. Whatever footage exists from inside that room, whatever vows filled those little books, whatever comes next for either of them professionally, for now, it's still theirs to reveal on their own schedule. The same way they've handled every other part of this relationship since it